So here's a little shorty lecture. There's no other place to put thermoregulation, and yet our ability to regulate our body temperature obviously has the ability to keep us healthy or make us sick. So I've got to throw this in. It's going to mostly be review because I kind of covered this stuff in A and P2, and so you probably remember a good amount of this. First of all, our body temperature, 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, pretty close to that. We always, we vary a little bit by person, but not much. It's pretty tightly controlled. Our enzymatic activity in our bodies require that temperature to work their best. If you get much hotter or much cooler, you really get sick in a hurry. It's maintained by the hypothalamus. We have sensors on the skin, and we have internal sensors that tell us what the temperature is. They send the signal to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus has a set point. It has set your temperature at 37 degrees Celsius, and therefore, if a temperature comes in that's any different than that, you'll either sweat to cool yourself off or you'll shiver to warm yourself up. It's kind of that straightforward, and once the temperature gets to where that set point says it should be, then it turns back off, negative feedback, and you're maintained at the right body temperature. So the set point is set by the hypothalamus. Thermoreceptors, visceral, meaning internal, cutaneous on the outside, receives the temperature, your actual temperature, compares it to the set point, causes you to sweat and vasodilate to bring more blood to the surface, make more sweat, get the heat out if you need to cool off, and shivering. You vasoconstrict and you shiver to use more ATPs, create more heat, and warm yourself back up again. Sympathetic, sympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. This is the only place where the sympathetic nervous system uses both norepinephrine and acetylcholine, two sets of nerves, one to make you sweat and vasodilate, one to make you shiver and vasoconstrict, because both being too hot and being too cold are fight or flight danger mechanisms. So the sympathetic nervous system controls all of your thermoregulation. Fever is caused by a couple of things. You can have a brain lesion that affects the hypothalamus and causes you to have a fever. Most fever, though, is caused by infection and our own body's response to try to kill the bad guys. The bacteria that like us don't like high temperatures either. We don't like high temperatures. They don't like high temperatures. So what we try to do is raise our temperature enough to kill them without killing us. Fever can kill us if it goes too high. But if it just goes up a couple of degrees until you win the battle and then goes back down, then your own body has done its job. It worked, at least reasonably well in days before we had antibiotics and antivirals to help get rid of these diseases by other ways. So the hypothalamus raises your set point to try to bring your temperature up, 102. You immediately are too cold then compared to your set point. So you shiver, you vasoconstrict and shiver. You get pale, you shiver, it's really uncomfortable, and your temperature goes up. When it reaches 102, your chills stop. The chills phase is designed to raise your temperature up to the new set point. Your hypothalamus knows you have an infection because all these interleukins and things are being released by your immune system and the cells that are being attacked by the bacteria. Remember, the cytokines, you stimulate everything, including the hypothalamus. So as long as you're still fighting the battle, your temperature can stay up. When you win the battle, these signaling molecules decrease, and the hypothalamus drops the set point back to 98.6. Now you're too hot compared to the set point, so you sweat. And you have the flush phase of the fever, which brings you back down. So chills bring you up, and then sweating and flush brings you back down again. The overall sweating mechanism. Here we have all of these interleukins and interferons and tumor necrosis factor and whatever cytokines are being released by the inflammation caused by the infection. They reach the hypothalamus, raise at the set point, and you shiver to bring a fever on. Now, pathological temperature changes sometimes they're caused by fever. I mean, you can have a fever that gets up to 108 and kills you. Most hyperthermic deaths, though, happen by outside mechanisms, not your own body raising your temperature that high, but you work too hard in the sun and you get really dehydrated and you get overheated and your temperature goes up. Your hypothalamus doesn't want it to go up. It hasn't raised your set point. You just got up because it's too hot. It's too hot. Happens to old people. Their thermoregulatory mechanisms are poor. It happens to kids who get locked in the car while mom goes in and buys groceries. You get too hot, you can't cool yourself down, and it's a hyperthermic condition. So you haven't reset the set point. You get temperatures that go up for other reasons. If you reach like around 105, 106, it starts doing damage, brain damage, nerve damage, especially in adults. Kids can tolerate 105 temperature. Adults really can't. And if it gets up around 109, you die. And so there are different levels of hyperthermia. First of all, you tend to get heat cramps if you're getting overheated and you're outside and you're doing stuff and you're trying to play, beach volleyball and you're at the beach and you haven't drunk enough water and your legs start cramping up. Heat exhaustion is the next level. Heat stroke is the next. Heat cramps is the main thing is your body's more interested in keeping you alive than it is in winning your tennis match. So if you get a little overheated, it draws the fluid out of your muscles, puts it in your skin so that you can thermoregulate. Underperfused muscles tend to cramp up. Okay? So if you stay really well hydrated and cool off between matches, you're more likely to be okay. But even elite athletes get muscle cramps during competitions. Especially if you're not acclimated. Acclimatization includes increasing your blood volume and increasing your sweating earlier to keep yourself cooler sooner. Heat exhaustion is the next level. Heat exhaustion is when your thermoregulatory system is getting overwhelmed. It responds by this huge response. You sweat like mad. Fluid from everywhere comes to your skin. Suddenly you're kind of drenched with sweat. You're a little woozy because your blood pressure has dropped to bring all the blood into your skin. And you feel bad, you get dizzy, you might faint, pass out. But at this point, your thermoregulatory mechanism is still at least working, and if you get under a shade tree, drink some water, cool yourself off, you're going to be okay. Heat stroke is a whole different animal. People die from heat stroke all the time. Young, healthy guys, that are playing football in the summer, getting ready for the fall season. What happens is you go past the point the temperature goes up high enough that your thermoregulatory mechanisms, the enzymatic activity can't work at that temperature. It shuts down and you stop sweating. You get red. Your temperature is so high you become delirious. You often pass out. You may go into convulsions. Temperature gets up around 105. Usually the person will lose consciousness. And it is extremely lethal. You've got to cool them off any way you can. Pour Gatorade on them. Whatever you can do to get their temperature down at least some, so that their own thermoregulatory mechanism can kick in and take them the rest of the way. Cerebral edema, damage to the nerves, central nervous system, including brain damage, damage to the kidneys. You can have kidney failure. You do have to be careful. If somebody's at 105 degrees, you want to bring them to 102. You don't want to bring them to 98.6 instantly, because there's no way to stop them from overshooting and going down to 94 and going into shock. So you can kill them by cooling them too much. If you can get them from 105 to 102 and then slowly get them the rest of the way, it's going to work better for them. Children are susceptible and old people are susceptible. Their thermoregulatory mechanisms don't work as well. Malignant hyperthermia is actually a disease. Malignant means it keeps getting worse and worse. And it is a neuromuscular disorder where your muscles are overly active, sustained contraction, constant use of ATP, extra giving off of extra heat, and the temperature goes up and up and up and up and up. It can be a lethal condition as well. Absent reflexes, fixed pupils, brain damage, stop breathing, heart stops, usually a pretty bad sign. And hypothermia means you're too cold. Hypothermia is usually from exposure to the elements. People go out hiking and they didn't take enough clothes and they get lost and they become hypothermic. They're rescued and they're barely awake. Or they don't get rescued and they just die. The problem is your body temperature is 98.6. It doesn't have to go up much to make you pretty sick. It doesn't have to go down much to make you pretty sick. From 98.6, you go down to 97 and you're shivering like mad. You go down to 95 and you stop shivering. It's, your thermoregulatory mechanism doesn't work outside the certain range. And once you stop shivering and making more heat, then you just sink into lethargy, maybe fall asleep, maybe die. One thing about hypothermia is, just like hyperthermia, get that person from their 95 up to 97 quickly and then slow down. Don't go from 95 to 98.6 and then overshoot to 100, 101. You can put them into shock and kill them. So again, from either extreme, get them out of the extreme and then move them gradually to their proper temperature. Tissue hypothermia, cellular metabolism slows down, blood thickens up, it can possibly clot, you reduce blood flow through the tissues. Your body's trying to do that to keep the blood from cooling in your fingertips, but it reduces the amount of blood in your hands so dramatically. Like they say, if you want to keep your hands warm, put on another jacket or put on a hat. because that will make your body warm enough. It'll keep sending blood out to your fingertips, and it'll help keep your hands warm. Tissue hypothermia, you know, if it's hypothermic and that's all, the tissue will probably survive. If it actually freezes, then you have frostbite, and that's really different. Frostbite is when crystals form inside the cells. You know that ice expands when it freezes, and it causes the cells to rupture and die. Accidental hypothermia, getting lost in the woods or falling through the ice. Children survive better, actually, if they fall through the ice. They are so small that the coldness reaches their internal tissues and refrigerates them and keeps them from essentially rotting and dying. Whereas an adult, they'll pass out and their heart may stop, but there's enough warmth deep inside their tissues that their organs just start to die and fail because they're not actually being refrigerated. Therapeutic hypothermia, cryosurgery, or cryogenics. Cryosurgery is actually where you use a cold knife to cut, or cold substance to cut, but cryogenics, they actually lower the body temperature enough to keep you alive during surgery. It's more popular in Russia and former Eastern Bloc countries. Maybe they didn't have as much access to heart-lung machines and the like. Generally, if we do a heart surgery and we have to stop the person's heart so they can work on it, we put the person on a heart-lung machine and it keeps their blood flowing and keeps them breathing for a short time while we fix their heart, and then we start it back up again. Cryogenics, those who use it say that they like it better in some ways. What they do is they put the person asleep so that they don't feel this. But then they cool them down, even with packs of ice, but also with making their blood colder, so that they cool them down enough that their heart stops, they quickly fix it, and warm them back up again, and it starts again. So they're actually using the cold as a heart-lung machine type situation. Trauma, damage to the central nervous system, cancer of the central nervous system, brain cancer, can lead to fever, central fever, by causing the hypothalamus to respond inappropriately. Whether it's injuries, strokes, surgeries. And that's it for thermoregulation.